Welcome one, welcome all to your channel. Here where we are developing and improving our African thinking patterns, improving our conversation around the greater African continent. What is it that we must be doing? Where are we coming from? Where are we? And where are we going? Most importantly, and we'll say this until it echoes through the corridors of every African child, we all have estates that we have been given, estates that have been born in estates from which we are coming from. And I would want to emphasize this, and I'll never get tired of emphasizing it. All of us, all the African children that are born into this world, we are born with three major estates. The first estate is the estate of the mind. The second estate is the estate of reproduction. The third estate is the estate of the land itself, the ground from where we all have our inheritance in. When African children are born, their umbilical cords are cut and they are planted into the ground. This is our birthright. This is our title deed. This is what connects us to the ground from which we are coming from. Let's go on them one by one. The first estate is the estate of the mind. This is your land. It grows grass on it. What quality of thoughts are you having? Who is planting information into your mind? What quality of ground is your thought pattern? And this mind is an active ground, for here is where you interact with yourself and the greater world that is outside there. This only does not remain as a piece of software which the biologists call gray matter, your medulla oblongata, your fertile ground. And if every child that is born, this piece of estate is given to them by the universe. Naked you come into this world, and naked you shall go back. But when you are born, therefore, the question remains, what kind of information are you collecting? This speaks to education. This speaks to socialization. And the quality of information that you collect into your mind, the next question becomes, when you have collected this information into the software of your thinking, how do you convert this information that you have been given? Either you're going to become an African, or you're going to become a Chinese, or you're going to become an Arab, or you're going to become an African. Unfortunately, because of the nature of education, most of our education has remained Eurocentric. For that reason, therefore, it produces out of us what I want to call coconuts. We remain brown on the outside, but white on the inside. Because in as much as we are African, the way we dress, the way we think, the way we play, the way we interact and associate is not altogether African. It has remained that though we are African in color, Mtu in color, Bantu in color, melanin in color, but the software which we are working on remains a European software. Does it sound funny to you that you can buy a Samsung phone and then you put Apple software on it? How will it behave? It will behave like an Apple phone. Therefore, you need to understand that software controls hardware. Software controls hardware. And in here on the Farmers of Thought channel, we are saying first and foremost, every African child, we need ownership of the estate of the mind. When an African owns their mind, when a Chinese owns their mind, when a European owns their mind, their worldview to everyone and everything out there will be controlled by the quality of their software. So we own our software. We own our thinking. What do I mean by that? We look back in the past where we're coming from. Uploading, downloading, connecting with our history gives us our persona. Our internal systems must become African. What do I mean? African in what we eat, African in what we drink, African in how we behave, African in how we heal ourselves. And African software says be in harmony with nature so that you can have not only an African body, but you also have an African mindset. Colonization with all its intelligence is not working much on our hardware. The main intention of colonization and decolonization, oppression, works specifically and purely on the African mind, trying to transform, manipulate, and bias the African mind to tell the African that European things, European thinking, European systems, European medicine, European entertainment, European fashion, European governance systems are superior to African systems. Therefore, education, medication, and everything that we might think that it's civilization, it's actually a passport, a migration of the African child from who they are to what colonization wants them to become. We go to school not to study about ourselves. We go to school not to learn about ourselves. We go to school not learning how to govern ourselves. We go to school not to learn how to dress like ourselves. We go to school not to learn about how is our spirituality designed. We go to school to learn about how European systems work, the literature of the Europeans, the entertainment of the Europeans, the medicines of the Europeans, the governance of the Europeans, the agricultural systems of the Europeans, the spirituality of the Europeans. By the time we come back, if you not noticed, that many of us, after we've been to school, we actually cannot relate to our own history. All of a sudden, you go back to the village, and the village does not make sense. You cannot connect with the grandmothers because they are uneducated. You can no longer eat the food you were eating when you were young because now you're educated. You want your food with gherkins, with olives, with feta cheese, and etc. You can actually no longer sleep on the same mat you were sleeping on. Apparently, when you go back to the village right now as an educated people, you are a problem to the community because even your own mother can no longer allow you to sleep on the ground. You can't sleep on the floor. So apparently, grandfather must jump away from his bed and give you their bed. They must now go to the shops and buy you cool drink. They must buy you some Coke and Fanta because apparently you cannot drink Maheo. You cannot longer drink Marula drink. And when you are sick, they are worried, how are they going to be treating this European child? They must look for an ambulance and run you to the hospital because they can no longer interact and deal with you. Because by being educated, you are no longer applicable, relevant, or you can no longer interact with your common community. Because education by essence tells them that this is your child, but the software they are now running on, the health system that is in them, is no longer the same default as the indigenous knowledge. Therefore, through the software, the hardware is being managed. This is what we see in our politics, because our politicians can no longer deal with the community at large. They think that by making us civilized is putting tarred roads, is putting hospitals with drips, it is putting industries, putting electricity and giving us tap water and etc. Who said we need them to build houses for us? What we are looking for as Africans is not a model of colonization which extracts the African from his own lifestyle, which is sustainable, by the way, where the bushes and the forests are our hospitals. We can give birth to our own children. We can immunize our own children. We can immunize our own cattle. We can feed our own ground with the manure from the cattle and etc. We can feed on goat milk to treat our asthmas and other problems we have. We can actually survive without us having European systems put into us if our community, if our environment is maintained and we have access to our forests, access to our rivers, access to our mountains. The colonialists did not find an African sitting under a tree waiting to die, almost at a point of excreting life out of him. They found a nation dancing. They found a nation singing. They found a nation interacting. They found a nation in celebrations with kudu horns held in our hands. Celebrating festivals, welcoming seasons, announcing the births of new children. Our software and our lives were well and well, very well. In fact, our old parents used to live 100 years, 110, 120 years. I was born at an era when my grandmother would send me to the cattle kraal, go and pick some fresh cow dung. We bring that cow dung and she would show us how to mix it with water and a few herbs, and she would smear it on the back of my grandmother, who was actually the sister to my grandfather. I saw her with my own eyes and would put cow dung on her back so that she does not crack and etc. And in this cow dung that she was putting on her back are all the bacteria and etc. that work to immunize and protect her skin. She was sleeping on the ground that was also smeared with cow dung. Every week, every 2 weeks, we would have to go back and collect more cow dung and put it on the floor. This is the history. I lived this history. I'm not hearing it by rumors. I lived here where I saw herbs and trees being put in dishes, and our women would sit in these dishes after childbirth to restore their birth canals and etc. and restore their health. This is the software we are talking about. How do we as Africans harvest our indigenous knowledge and collect that information and bring it to the present. So that when the European is bringing her information onto the African space, we can say, oh, hold on a bit. We don't need to be using contraceptions in terms of having our women injected with contraception. We can put beads on their waistlines, which can teach them on these 7 days, your periods are on the red days, and etc. They become orange, you're now clearing up on the white days, you're now clean on the blue days, you're now fertile in the green days, and etc. Your monthly cycle is over. The European finds an African with beads on their waistline. They say that's demonic. They don't know that this was actually a timetable of birth control, a timetable of fertility, where our women had their health on their waistlines. Young girls were taught how to count these beads on their waistlines and control their own birth controls. It was up to a woman to walk up to a man and actually say, I am now clean, I am now fertile. They could decide when to have children and when not to have children. This is the software I am talking about. Not everything that is European is kosher. Not everything that is African is demonic and evil. And once you mess up with the software of the Africans, you can always control their behavior. Take note that colonization benefits from the colonized to sponsor the project of colonization. Therefore, if I tell you that you cannot appear on my pulpit without a jacket and a tie, I run to the side of the street and I open up a shop where I'm selling the jacket and ties, then you will come and buy the jackets and ties so that you can appear before a God who is European, who cannot accept you in your traditional clothes, but accept you in European clothes. This music is not acceptable. Therefore, I will sell European music that you must sponsor again. This health is not acceptable. Then you must come to the hospitals and buy the tablets. Therefore, African stuff has been demonized. And once you demonize something and you say it is satanic, religion therefore works as a marketing platform to divorce the African from his culture so that he accepts European culture and sponsors it with their money. Therefore, the African of today works very hard for 30 days. And when he has all the money, where does he take it to? He takes it to the European system to buy medicine, to buy the clothes, to buy houses, to buy the welfare. And at the end of the day, the same people who are complaining about colonization are spending all their money supporting a colonial system. When we talk about deconstruction, when we talk about decolonization, we are saying you do not need to spend as much money on insurance. Maybe you need to spend some of that money in buying goats and buying sheep and buying cattle and buying land, and make sure that you plant your own food and look after your own welfare. The first estate is the estate of the mind. Who is controlling your mind? And he who has access to your farm has permission to harvest from it. For the one who plants by the laws of nature has permission to harvest. If the colonialist has permission to plant in our mental space as Africans, the same Europeans have permission to come and harvest from it. For the information that they've given to us is followed by the sponsorship of the economic system that follows that, the political system that follows that, the agricultural system that follows that. And after the estate of the mind, we come to the estate of reproduction. What quality of seed are we carrying between our two legs, both male and female? Who is planting in your farm as a woman? And what farm are you planting on as a man? Men are connecting cables between two civilizations, the past and the future. Men are cables. Before you plug your cable, can you establish what quality of soil are you planting into? Because this speaks of posterity, continuity. What are you connecting to? Marriage, therefore, is not just a physical thing. It is a spiritual thing, where you as a man look around all these pieces of land that are standing in front of you, and you must make a decision as to which ground are you choosing and what seed are you planting into that. Right now, as we are talking, the African does not have full rights to his own reproduction. There are some people sitting in Oslo, people sitting in London, people sitting in New York, people sitting in Japan who are deciding how many Africans must be born, how many Africans must be killed. As we talk right now in the month of July 2020, so far up to date, 23 million children around the world have actually been aborted. Just abortion. I'm not talking about contraception, just abortion. The question is, who has an interest in the population of this world and what benefit is in there? We hear from the world over. The bigger politicians are deciding how many people can occupy the planet and how many people can share the resources of this world. So there are people, intelligent people, politicians, economists, and biologists who are sitting in their laboratories and thinking, how many people must we have in 2040? Will the resources of the world be sufficient for that population? And plans have been put into place through contraception and etc. Half, if not a third of our African women, if not 90% of our women right now, are on contraception to protect them from making children. But what's wrong with us making children as Africans? For the resources that we have on the African continent are enough to sustain us as Africans. But the Europeans know if the Africans best in population, their usage of resources will be enough for them. They'll be not enough for us as Europeans. So they've come with technologies, running systems to manage the African politics. And how do you manage politics? You manage it by reproduction. So the African man right now and the African woman don't have full rights as to how many children they must have. And not only that, how many children they must have, but if the African has too many children, then he will occupy all the land. And by occupying all the land, the resources will be managed by the African. So the European is aware of that. The African is not aware of that. And so our women are planted with contraceptions, loops, and etc., and inserted into their wombs and etc., so that you reduce the population of the African. We no longer have rights to our reproduction as African. So one issue is the biological intelligence. The other issue is economic contraception, where the African is now being told because you don't have enough resources, you cannot make enough children. But tell me, if I have 3 square kilometers of land as an African, who has the right of telling me how many children must I have? Because if I have enough resources, enough capacity to make the number of children that I want to, is that not a human right? Is that not a human right? And that is the first section of the human right on the entire world, that every person has a right to decide what to do with themselves and their own reproduction. But alas, that's not true. The African does not have permission to having that right, the right of reproduction. Because with the right of reproduction, it tends directly to threaten the right of resources. And those that have industries that are feeding on the African resources are beginning to make decisions as to how many human beings must be on the face of the world. And the African man is actually challenged. Our politicians have become prostitutes because they are in good relationships with these funders who are deciding what the African must do with his reproduction. So the first estate is the estate of the mind. The second estate is the estate of reproduction. The third estate is the estate of the ground, the very land that is lying underneath our feet. So the estate between your 2 ears, who is planting on it. The estate hanging between your legs, who is deciding what you are doing with your reproduction. But the third estate is the estate of the ground, the land. Yes, the land. All the wars that have been fought on the face of the earth, people are fighting for nothing but the land. The land. Until politics addresses the land, until economics addresses the land, until economics addresses the land, until agriculture addresses the land, until accommodation addresses the land, until mining addresses the land, all politics remains a waste of time. But again, let me ask you a question. How do you give people the land underneath their feet when they don't have the land between their legs and they don't have the land between their 2 ears? It is dangerous, therefore, to give people land as of soil when they don't own the land between their 2 ears and they don't own the land between their 2 legs. Land, therefore, is a right to every human being. Indians have a right to Indian ground. Asians have a right to Asian ground. Europeans have a right to European grounds. Americans have a right to American ground. Can I ask you a question? Can also the African have the rights to African land? But all of us know, of course, that all those lands put together with all their resources, nothing compares to the African ground. We have enough minerals, we have enough trees, and by the way, we have enough resources of fresh water around the whole world. In the new millennium that we're moving into, water will become one of the most expensive commodities. Some of these big cities around the world right now are not drinking water, they're drinking hard water. What do I mean by hard water? It is water from their sewage, water from their kitchens that is taken into the sewage pipes. It is purified and it is sent back to them to drink again. Us in Africa, we still have an opportunity of drinking fresh water, planting original, organic plants and seeds into the ground and eat from them. Is this not a mystery? That is how our forefathers lived, by learning and knowing how to utilize the ground. And from utilizing the ground, they reproduced children and left them an inheritance. They taught their children and passed on that information from one generation to another. What inheritance do we have? But the inheritance of the estate of the mind, managed by the estate of reproduction. And from reproduction, we moved over into the land that is underneath our feet. Every African child, if we must have an education program, the education program must teach every African child, how do you manage these three estates? All forms of education are a waste of time if the African child would learn everything else about everybody else except about themselves. Therefore, African child, know yourself. Own your estate. Own your estate and own your estate. As I've always said, and I'll say it again, when the face is beautiful and the software is not working, hardware between the legs suffer, and the estate of the ground will be taken off by strangers. Africans need to learn how to own our minds, own our reproduction, and then we can own our production that is underneath our feet. Our land is ours, but if we don't have the software of leadership, the software of families, the software of inheritance and heritage, we remain to be exploited by those who are coming to the African ground. We want to challenge you, therefore, here on Farmers of Thought Institute, that we need to start learning. We need to start mastering. We need to start harvesting indigenous knowledge so that our land, both three estates that we have in our hands, can be fully utilized to develop so that by the time we pass away, we can actually leave an inheritance in the hands of our children. Every generation that is born holds in estate the generation that belongs to the next generation. Therefore, we don't have anything in our hands. We are custodians. We are the trustees of land. So that the day we die, we hand over this estate into the hands of our children. What am I saying? Every man must have two wives. The first wife is land. The second wife is the one who bears you children. If you don't have the first land, which is Eden, you don't have permission to marry an Eve. For the first Eden, which is the first wife, will always teach you how to look after the second wife, who is your wife. Without land, therefore, it is illegal to reproduce. Without land, it is illegal to actually become a father. For the first estate, which is land, gives you permission to look after the second woman. We want all our African men to love their land the same way they love their wives. And then they walk around to me and say, Maponga J, we cannot give these Africans land because they don't know what to do with it. Keep your peace to yourself. When a man marries a wife, whether he sleeps with her once a week or once a month, it's none of your business. Go to your own house and sleep with your own wife. We own land not because we can use it. We own land because it belongs to us. And it is illegal to make an African an illegal immigrant in Africa, an illegal immigrant in Europe, an alien in Asia, and a foreigner in America. So where must the African child call home? Therefore, to me, Africa, Kebala, Embo, is my home. And there's nowhere else where I can claim ownership of land except here on my motherland. And anything less than that, I will not accept from anybody else. Politics says politicians will own the land on behalf of the people. We now know they are not owning that land, but they are selling it to the foreigners for the benefit of themselves. We want to challenge, therefore, every African government, every African royal monarchy, every African family. Introduce your children to real estate. All of them are estates. The only real estate is the real estate of the land, the real estate of reproduction, the real estate of the mind. Let us plant good seeds, then we can harvest good crops out of them. Without our minds, we don't have reproduction. Without reproduction, we don't have production and ownership of the estate of land. Farmers of thought, plant your seeds and you can harvest the fruits thereof. Those that are planting vegetables will never harvest the fruits. For when we have the idea of planting long term plants, we can harvest long term crops out of them. Don't be misled by colonization and development. We cannot make this our continent into a concrete jungle. Organic is the way to go because with an organic lifestyle, we actually have posterity, we have longevity. And I therefore want to challenge you back to Ubuntu. Let's go back to factory settings. Factory settings. This is what we are as Africans. And anything less than that makes us coconuts. I say no. I say no to being colonized. I will own my mind. I will own my reproduction. I will own my land. This is my inheritance. I will hold it in custody for the children that are coming after me. Therefore, I'm a trustee on behalf of the next generation. Africans, own your estates. Farmers of thought. Until we see you again next time, have yourself a wonderful time. Don't do what I wouldn't do. If you do it better. I was